Before you draw another pentagram, before you vibrate another divine name, before you attempt to invoke a force, open a path, or move one step deeper into the Golden Dawn system, let's pause to understand the language the ritual is written in. Because a ritual is more than a visible sequence of movements. The movement is the surface. Beneath it is a structure of symbols, numbers, names, forces, colors, directions, and relationships. Each gesture activates a specific part of that structure. Every word points somewhere. Every symbol connects to something beyond itself. When those connections are understood, the ritual begins to open. When they're not understood, you can still perform the ceremony. The words can be pronounced correctly. The lines can be traced in the air. The physical movements can be executed perfectly. But the deeper architecture remains invisible. That's why the Golden Dawn text comes with knowledge lectures. And at first glance, the first knowledge lecture doesn't look particularly dramatic. It begins with the 4 elements, then the 12 signs of the Zodiac, then the planets, then the Hebrew alphabet, then the 10 Sephiroth of the Tree of Life. To a modern reader, this can look like a collection of basic occult facts, material to memorize so you can pass a test and move into the next grade. That interpretation misses the entire purpose of the lecture, because this isn't a trivia sheet. It's the beginning of a symbolic operating language. The first knowledge lecture is teaching you the categories through which the Golden Dawn understands the universe, and through which it teaches the magician to reorganize consciousness. The difference matters. A list of facts exists outside of you. A language becomes part of the way you think. And that's what the lecture is designed to do. The student is not only asked to read the material, the student is expected to commit it to memory. That requirement can feel outdated. Modern education has trained people to believe that memorization is the lowest form of learning. Why memorize something when you can look it up? Well, because during a ritual, you're not studying a chart, you're operating inside the chart. You can't stop in the middle of a ceremony and search for the planetary symbol of Saturn. You cannot break concentration to remind yourself which signs belong to the triplicity of fire. You can't establish a full, meaningful contact with a Hebrew divine name while the letters composing that name remain meaningless marks in your mind. The knowledge has to be present before it's needed. It has to move from information you possess into a structure you can think through automatically. A musician practices scales for the same reason. The scale isn't the music, but without internalizing the relationships between the notes, the musician remains trapped at the level of conscious calculation. Every movement requires effort. Every decision interrupts the flow. Once the structure has been internalized, something changes. The musician stops thinking about where every finger needs to go. The structure becomes available to expression. The Golden Dawn knowledge lectures work in a similar way. They install these symbolic relationships that later ritual work depends upon. And the first category introduced is the 4 elements: fire, air, earth, and water. These are more than physical substances. The lecture defines them through combinations of 2 qualities. Heat and dryness produce fire. Heat and moisture produce air. Cold and dryness produce earth. Cold and moisture produce water. This is the first major shift the student has to make. Fire does not only mean flame. Water does not only mean liquid. The elements are patterns of qualities. They are ways force behaves. They are conditions through which energy becomes recognizable. Fire separates, intensifies, consumes, illuminates, and drives. Air moves, communicates, expands, and circulates. Water receives, joins, reflects, and adapts. Earth stabilizes, limits, supports, and gives form. Those descriptions go beyond the first few lines of the lecture but they reveal the practical implication of what the lecture is introducing. When the magician works with an element, the magician is not pretending that physical fire or physical water has appeared in the room. The operator is establishing contact with a pattern, a mode of activity, a particular organization of force. And once that pattern is understood, it can be recognized in more than one place. Fire can be recognized in the body, in emotion, in thought, in conflict, in ambition, in purification, in the birth of an idea, in the destruction of an old form. The physical flame becomes one expression of a much larger principle. That principle is what the symbol gives the mind access to. Then the lecture moves into the Zodiac. 12 signs, Aries through Pisces. Again, you could treat this as a list. Aries is the ram, Taurus is the bull, Gemini is the twins, and so on. But the lecture immediately distributes those 12 signs among 4 triplicities, each belonging to one of the 4 elements. Aries, Leo, and Sagittarius belong to fire. Taurus, Virgo, and Capricorn belong to earth. Gemini, Libra, and Aquarius belong to air. Cancer, Scorpio, and Pisces belong to water. This reveals something fundamental about the Golden Dawn system. The categories don't remain isolated. They begin connecting immediately. The zodiac is not one subject and the elements another subject. The zodiac shows the operation of the elements within a larger cycle. The element remains the underlying force, but the zodiacal sign gives that force a more specific mode of expression. Fire doesn't operate identically through Aries, Leo, and Sagittarius. The underlying quality is related, but the form through which it acts is different. This is how the system gains precision. The magician, by working with fire, learns to recognize different expressions, phases, and organizations of fiery force. The same principle applies to earth, air, and water. The symbolic vocabulary becomes increasingly exact. Then come the planets: Saturn, Jupiter, Mars, Sol, Venus, Mercury, Luna, the 7 traditional planets. In ceremonial magic, the planets represent distinct modes of power. Mars concentrates force into division, severity, struggle, and decisive action. Venus draws through attraction, relationship, pleasure, and harmony. Mercury connects, translates, exchanges, and communicates. Jupiter expands, organizes, governs, and bestows. Saturn restricts, defines structures, and brings things to their limit. The Sun establishes center, vitality, illumination, and identity. The Moon receives, reflects, forms, fluctuates, and transmits. I recommend not thinking of these as dictionary definitions. They are entrances into forces that become more complex through study and experience. But the practical point is simple. The magician must know which force is being addressed, because different forces produce different movements and consciousness. You would not use the same method to expand something that you'd use to restrict it. You wouldn't invoke severity when the operation requires reconciliation. You wouldn't use a solar formula when the work is specifically lunar. Accuracy of symbol produces accuracy of operation. This is one of the reasons correspondences matter. Within the Golden Dawn system, a correspondence tells you that 2 symbols participate in a shared pattern. The connection may involve number, quality, function, position on the tree of life, astrological attribution, element, color, divine name, or ritual role. The more of these relationships the magician understands, the more information a single symbol can carry. To an untrained person, the symbol of Mars is a mark. To the trained practitioner, it opens an entire field of associations. Force, conflict, iron, severity, heat, courage, danger, Gabura. The number 5, red. The meaning doesn't have to be verbally recited each time the symbol appears. Eventually, the recognition occurs as a single act. The symbol activates the pattern. This is symbolic fluency, and symbolic fluency is a huge part of ceremonial magic. The lecture then moves into Hebrew. This is where many students begin to feel resistance. The alphabet is unfamiliar. The letters are read from right to left. Each letter has a name, a numerical value, and a meaning. 5 letters change their form when written at the end of a word. The pronunciation system may not be familiar. The characters require care. It's easy to think that this is a specialized subject that can be skipped until later. I recommend learning and integrating the Hebrew letters into your life as soon as possible. Your rituals will be stronger because of them, and it'll get confusing later on in the work if you don't have an understanding of the language. The lecture says directly, Hebrew letters are holy symbols. They should be carefully drawn and square. That sentence tells you how you should approach them, as holy symbols. Each letter is simultaneously a sound, a number, a written form, and an idea. Aleph is more than the first letter. Mem is more than the equivalent of an English M. Each occupies a place inside a symbolic structure. And later, those letters will appear inside divine names, angelic names, Sephirothic names, passwords, invocations, and path attributions. If the letters are unknown, the names remain opaque. You may be able to pronounce the sound, but you can't see the structure. I'll say it again. A divine name written in Hebrew is much, much more than an English word converted into another alphabet. Its letters carry numerical and symbolic relationships that can be examined independently and in combination. This is one of the basic premises of Kabbalistic work. The letter matters, its position matters, its value matters, its relationship to the other letters matters. A change in spelling can produce a change in number. A change in number can reveal a connection to another word or formula. This is why the Hebrew alphabet is found at the beginning of the Golden Dawn text. It wasn't because they were trying to make entry difficult for people. It's because everything built from the letters is hard to access until the letters themselves are known. Then the lecture introduces the Sephiroth, 10 emanations of deity, 10 Sephiroth arranged into the structure called the Tree of Life. This is the point at which the separate categories begin revealing the system they belong to. The Tree of Life is the central organizing structure of the Golden Dawn. The elements connect to it. The planets connect to it. The Zodiac connects to it. The Hebrew alphabet connects to it. Divine names, archangels, angelic orders, colors, grades, and ritual formulas will all eventually be organized through it. The tree is where the symbolic language becomes a symbolic architecture. This distinction is important. A language gives you individual signs. An architecture tells you where they belong in relation to one another. The Sephiroth form a pattern. Each Sephirah has a position. Each position has relationships. Those relationships create pathways through which consciousness can be studied, balanced, and transformed. You don't fully understand a Sephirah by memorizing a one-word translation. Knowing that Malkut means kingdom is the beginning. It's not mastery. You have to understand why Malkut occupies its position, what stands above it, what enters it, what it receives, what it represents in the human being, what it represents in the cosmos, how its force appears when balanced, how it appears when distorted, what changes when consciousness moves from one level of the tree to another. The name opens the door. The structure reveals the room. This is why the first knowledge lecture moves through the material in the order that it does. Elements, zodiac, planets, Hebrew letters, Sephiroth. It is giving the neophyte the first pieces of the map. Not the entire map, not yet. At the neophyte level, the student is learning how to recognize the symbols from which the system is constructed. This is the magical equivalent of learning to read. And there's another implication here that must be stated clearly. A symbol is not whatever you personally decide it means. Personal experience matters. Intuition matters. The way a symbol unfolds inside your consciousness matters. But serious symbolic work begins with discipline. The Golden Dawn system gives symbols defined relationships. Those relationships form a shared language. If every practitioner replaces those relationships with whatever feels personally meaningful in the moment, the system stops being a system. It becomes free association. There is a place for personal revelation, but revelation becomes more precise when it emerges through a stable structure. The discipline comes first. Learn what the symbol means inside the tradition. Learn where it's placed. Learn what it corresponds to. Learn how it's been used. Then observe what happens when you encounter it in practice. That sequence protects the work from fantasy. It gives the experience something to push against, something to confirm, something that can be tested over time. The beginner often wants the experience without the vocabulary. The Golden Dawn gives you the vocabulary so you can recognize the experience when it comes. Without a symbolic framework, a vision may be intense but unintelligible. An image appears, a color flashes, an animal emerges, a name enters the mind. Planetary symbol repeats across several workings. Something has happened, but the practitioner has no method for decoding it. Training changes that. The symbols begin to arrive already connected to a network of meaning. The practitioner can interpret without reducing everything to the first personal association that comes to mind. This does not make the experience less mysterious. It makes the mystery readable, and that's the first real function of the first knowledge lecture. It teaches the student how to read the system. Later, when you stand inside a ritual space, the symbols will no longer appear separately. The pentagram will imply an element, the direction will carry an attribution, the divine name will be composed of Hebrew letters, the archangel will occupy a defined position, the colors will correspond to a specific scale, the force invoked will have relationships to the zodiac, the planets, and the tree of life. What appears externally as a short ritual may contain multiple symbolic systems operating at the same time. That density is deliberate. It is what allows a relatively simple ceremony to produce layers of effect. The body performs one action, the voice vibrates another layer, the imagination establishes another. The symbolic understanding of the operator activates another. The ritual becomes a convergence point, but only when the operator knows what's converging. This is the work of the knowledge lectures. They prepare the interior instrument. They give the mind a structure capable of holding what the ritual generates. So as we move through the first lecture, don't approach the material as disconnected facts. Do not memorize Aries, Aleph, Saturn, and Keter as though they were entries in 4 unrelated textbooks. Look for the relationships. Look for their recurrence. Ask why the same number, color, quality, or symbol appears in more than one place. Ask what changes when a force moves from one level of the system into another. Ask what the ritual is communicating before you ask what it's producing. The first stage is recognition. The second is relationship. The third is direct experience. You learn the symbol, You learn where it belongs. Then you encounter what it points toward. That is how the language becomes operational. And once it becomes operational, the knowledge lectures stop being something you just studied before doing magic. You realize that learning it was part of the magic. The memorization changes what the mind can recognize. The contemplation changes how the symbols are organized internally. The ritual places those symbols into motion, and repeated practice allows the structure to move from the page into the consciousness of the operator. That is where the Golden Dawn training actually begins. It begins when the symbols stop being decoration, when fire is no longer only fire, when a planet is no longer only an object in the sky, when a Hebrew letter is no longer an unfamiliar mark, when the tree of life is no longer a diagram you're looking at, because the structure has begun to appear everywhere, in ritual, in the world, and eventually in you. The first knowledge lecture is the alphabet of that recognition. Now we begin learning how to read. You can read the first knowledge lecture, the Neophyte Grade papers, from the Golden Dawn textbook. The page numbers vary based on the edition, but it's toward the beginning. If you want to learn all the rituals from the Golden Dawn in a progressive sequence, I created a guided video ritual for every single one of those rituals. Over 100 rituals, and put those video rituals into a course. If you're interested, the link is in the description. This has been part 1 of 6, unpacking the first knowledge lecture. 5 more videos coming soon that explain in greater detail what the Neophyte rituals are actually doing to your consciousness. Thank you for watching. I'll see you soon.